What's up, guys? Coach Tony from Bonvec Strength, and today I wanted to talk about something that I've been thinking about a lot as we've onboarded a handful of new lifters, both in person at Bonvec Strength and also into our online training program. And that's what I look for when I start training a new lifter. Now, I've talked a lot about the coach to athlete relationship and how important it is to build that over time. And it's something that kind of has to unfold on its own. It's something you can't really force, but there are a couple of things that I do with all new lifters that helps me kind of build that relationship and helps me be a better coach for that lifter. And the first thing that I want to do is determine where that lifter can improve their technique the most right off the bat. And a lot of times lifters who I'm working with, especially in an online setting, are already pretty far along as far as technique goes. In general, people who seek out online coaching in the powerlifting realm have already done their due diligence on their own. Typically, they've done a lot of learning on their own. Maybe they've worked with a coach before, but it takes a highly motivated person to seek out online training for powerlifting. So very rarely do I get somebody who comes to work with me in an online setting who is just a mess technically. And that doesn't happen too often in person either, but I'm more likely to run into complete beginners who just have not had any sort of inclination as far as what optimal technique is. That happens more often in person. Online, usually people are pretty far along, but chances are there are things that they can do better. And because of the lack of real-time feedback, it can be a little bit tricky in terms of figuring out what might be the best technique for those lifters in an online setting. So what I'll typically do for the squat, the bench, and the deadlift, I'll use some sort of working warm-up where we're adjusting multiple things about the technique to help me see that lifter in, for example, with the squat, different stance widths, different bar placements, different foot orientation. So feet straight ahead, feet turned out a little bit more, maybe different footwear, like squatting in flat shoes or squatting in squat shoes. For the bench press, usually grip width and foot position. So I want to see them bench with a wide grip, with a medium grip, with a narrow grip, with their feet flat on the ground, with their heels off the ground, with their feet wide, with their feet narrow. We just have to explore these things because even if somebody has gotten really strong or really comfortable with a certain technique, you just never know if there's a better option for that lifter unless they try it. And that's not to say that, the grass is always greener, that you should always be trying to change your technique and chase the next best thing. But every once in a while, it's a good idea to add some of that variety. And I've talked about working warm-ups a lot and the way that we utilize those and how it's become such an effective teaching tool for us at Bonvec Strength. But in an online setting especially, it helps me kind of discover what technique will be best for that lifter and help me implement it from afar. If I'm in person, I can see those things very, very quickly and make a best judgment as far as what will work best for that lifter. Online, it can be a little bit tricky because of that delay of feedback. Now, the next thing I want to know about a lifter is how long it takes them to kind of run a certain set and rep and RPE scheme before they no longer respond to that stimulus anymore. Reactive training systems, Mike Teixeira, kind of the pioneering coach to bring RPE-based training to the forefront in especially American powerlifting. They would call this a time to peak. They'll use something that's called a developmental block and something that I've kind of adapted to use with our lifters. And basically, you just have to run the same set, rep, and RPE scheme as long as you can until it doesn't work anymore. And that's why, especially early on with online lifters, I will explain to them very clearly, like, look, the main lifts are going to look the same for a while. And it may feel like a copy and paste job, and sometimes I have to resist my own urge to change something, but it's very valuable for me as a coach to understand how long we can run the same approach with a lifter before it stops working. And if something is working, there's no need to just change it arbitrarily. I think there's like this big habit of a lot of coaches to try to change things every 3, 4, 5 weeks just to keep the lifter entertained. And if people are coming to you for powerlifting coaching online, they're not there to be entertained. They're there to get results. They're there to get stronger. So it would be silly to shy away from something that's still working just for the sake of variety. So I'll use a variety of different set and rep schemes, kind of all in conjunction. that sort of daily undulation where, maybe you're going like heavy sets of 5, sets of 5 at a 9 RPE on one day, and then maybe sets of 8 at maybe like a 7 or 8 RPE on the other day to kind of get a feel for, and those are just random numbers. You can mix and match all you want, but it's your job as the coach, my job as the coach in this case, to figure out how long I can run that specific set and rep scheme until the lifter is no longer making progress on it. And I try to file away different rep ranges because let's say that somebody runs nothing but sets of 5 at a 9 RPE for their squat, for their main squat day, and they're able to make progress week over week for 6 consecutive weeks before they see some sort of backslide in progress. Chances are they're not going to have that same time to peak for different rep ranges. They probably wouldn't be able to run sets of 4 or sets of 3 for that same exact rep range, so we have to try that stuff out. So for the first extended period of time that I'm working with somebody, I'm testing different rep ranges and I'm seeing how long we can run that stimulus. And that's not even taking into account like different RPEs. Somebody might be able to run things at a 7 or 8 RPE much longer than they could run at a 9 or 10 RPE just because that stimulus is higher. But you just don't know. Some lifters respond really, really well to short bursts of high intensity. You just have to kind of wave it in and out. So I'm always trying to figure out how long it takes for a lifter to peak with a specific rep range and a specific RPE assignment. And then the final thing that I like to find out about all my lifters is what style of feedback they respond best to. Now, I was just talking to a couple of my lifters today about how often in my coaching career I've gotten trapped in this habit of being very overly positive. We call it toxic positivity, where I always try to put a very positive spin on things. And that's largely because of the way that I would like to be coached. I've had a lot of coaches in my career, mostly in team sports, mostly in baseball, in high school and college, who were very negative, very old school, would oftentimes use shame as some sort of motivator, and that just didn't work well for me individually. I guess I'm a big softie. I didn't respond very well to negative feedback. So I, in turn, ended up coaching almost everyone I got in contact with the same way I would want to be coached, with a lot of positive reinforcement, with a lot of focusing on the bright side, a lot of putting positive spin on things. And I've learned throughout the years that there are people who don't like that, who want to be coached in such a way where you're not sugarcoating anything, where you're very blunt, where you just give them exactly the feedback that they need to hear, the accountability that they need, being called out when they need to be called out, telling them that their technique is not acceptable, that was not the way that we want it done, and just not polish a turd, so to speak. And in an online setting, again, because of the delayed feedback, we're communicating not on a second-to-second basis, but sometimes as infrequently as once a week via an email or via some video review. It can be a little bit harder to discover what type of feedback lifters like, but that's where I think you try several different types of communication, and we have several avenues by which our online lifters can get written feedback and communication. We do it via email. We do it in the training spreadsheets themselves. We do it in our private Facebook group where we generally do our video review. And I can kind of get a sense for what type of feedback a lifter responds best to based on how much feedback they then give me in return. I talk about asking good questions as a coach, and that works in an online setting too. And if I'm asking questions and a lifter gives me a very detailed response, I can be sure that the way that I frame that feedback kind of jived with them. If I ask them a question and I get very, very little feedback, maybe a 1 or 2 word answer, then I can bet that that's maybe not the style of feedback that they're most receptive to, and I can adjust my approach. Again, online training can be challenging because of the delay in every bit of communication that happens so quickly in person. So when I'm working with athletes, when I'm working with lifters, especially in an online setting, I'm looking for ways that we can improve their technique. I'm looking for how long it takes them to peak given a certain stimulus, and I'm looking for what type of feedback they respond best to. So if you're a coach who works with people online, make sure you're trying to dial in those three things so you can get the best results for your client. And if you're a lifter who works with a coach online, make sure that your coach is aiming to learn those things about you as well, so that they can coach you to the best of their abilities and give you the results that you're deserving of and that you're paying for.